I'm Jordan Lulich. This is the Lulich Corner, and today I get to sit down with John Jennings from Raymond James. So, John, thanks so much for joining us again, for coming in, volunteering your time, and for just sharing your wisdom about everything financial planning. So I really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure to be here again. I love talking about this stuff. It's what I do on a daily basis. And so, I love just spreading good information around the community as well. So the more we can get these words out and this knowledge and information, I think the better.
Well, I think in the past, one of the things that we've done is we've talked generally about topics that apply to almost everyone. Today, we're going to really do a deep dive and talk about families. And I think it's cool because you have a family, I have a family. Well, it's things that are personal for us that I think that we're implementing in our own lives, and also for other people who may have children or looking to start to building a family. This conversation is going to be directly relevant to you. And I think in starting out in terms of building a family and having a family, we really get inundated with all these different types of expenses.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about like the cost of a car now.
Yeah.
And like 2 car payments could total what a mortgage payment was 10, 15 years ago.
Or a wedding now.
Yeah, a wedding, what, $40,000, $50,000 is probably the average cost of a wedding. There's a lot of expenses, at least when you go about like starting, getting that down payment to purchase a home, moving in, you got furniture, you got the cost of a wedding, you got car payments. And so how do people balance with financial planning and putting money aside with all these other expenses that life brings their way, especially when they're first starting out?
It's like anything, you got to make sure to prioritize it, and like I just speaking from my own experience, our home front's crazy. You're changing diapers, you're like toys are flying across the room, like you got nap time, bedtime, meal time, like it's just life's insane. So you got to try to find time to prioritize these things. The one thing that I think is important is like, a lot of people get overwhelmed by it, I think. And so, I'm just saying, you don't have to go diving head first. Start small. Start making some small contributions. Look at the various account options, 529s, Roth IRAs for yourself, making sure that you're taking care of yourself too from a retirement standpoint, because that could end up affecting your kids one day too if you don't adequately save for that.
Absolutely.
But just start small. Make sure you're making the most of the money that you do have, and don't get overwhelmed by it. Just keep it simple and start small.
I know you put together financial plans for people, and so I know people may not realize how much they're spending on certain things, right? But one example is like if you just go pick up 4 or 5 Gatorades from 7-Eleven, every week, like that adds up.
Oh, yeah.
So, knowing where money in, money out, knowing where your money's spent, I think is also something that is probably often overlooked. Would you say that's a true statement when you're putting together these financial plans for people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been through it with friends and clients where we actually start, and it doesn't happen with everybody, but some people go through the budgeting exercise where they're really like, hey, here's my bank activity, and the credit card information. You're like, you spent $1,000 at Dunkin' Donuts this month, Like, those things add up, those little charges every day. Yeah. And so, you don't have to get that granular. I like to pay attention to my credit card statements so I can get an idea. I don't keep it like a categorized budget on a daily basis and keep receipts and log things like that. But
a full-time job.
Right, it is, and you got enough going on in life to like monitor your credit card statements. Try to be mindful of your spending, I think can go a long way, because those small little expenses, those subscriptions, things like that, they add up over time.
I think this is probably more of a question as a dad. What do you think is the importance of starting with, keeping in mind that you have young children, the importance of starting early to do your estate plan?
We just went through this, like you said, just recently. I know you did as well. Our twins are 2.5 years old today.
That's awesome.
It is. It's been a good ride. But as soon as you start to introduce kids into the picture, then and I've been in this business for 10 years. But now all of a sudden my mind changed gears because now I'm a parent myself. And so I've been trying to have more conversations with my clients that have young children and just be more emphatic on the importance of these things, because you spend so much time, building up these assets and making sure you're preparing for your future and for your children's future. And I think an estate plan can give you, the ability to protect that and then, or to provide for your children. God forbid something crazy happens the day when you're not around. And so I've seen crazy things like that happen. And so as soon as our kids came into the world, my wife and I sat down, somebody who are actually at Lulich Attorneys, Shannon, who was phenomenal, and put together a whole estate plan, protecting our financial assets, providing for our children the day that we're, not in the picture, heaven forbid. And then also making sure, from not a financial thing, but a big thing, is like, who looks out for your children the day comes when, God forbid, you're not here.
I mean, people spend so much time building their legacy and they don't spend enough time trying to protect it. And so when you think about estate planning, that's a tool in order to protect the legacy that you're building or that you've built. I think a big misconception that people have is that estate planning is only for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, I don't need to do estate planning. That's only for rich people. Anytime I'm talking to a parent, it's like, hey, what happens if something happens to you and your spouse? Who's going to be the guardian for your kids? Do you want to choose that? Do you want to let the government choose that?
Right. The courts.
Right. I don't want to let somebody else choose it. I want to have direct control over that. And actually, my decision today on who's going to take care of my son is probably going to change in 5, 6, 7 years from now. And so it's something that we need to constantly revisit until our kids are 18 years old.
Absolutely.
And so no, you don't have to spend tens, $5,000, threes of thousands of dollars. You can spend a very small amount putting together an estate plan, especially if you're younger, and at least know that everything is protected if something happens to you, at least for your kids' sake. And that's really what it's all about, is from an estate planning perspective.
I agree.
And so what about for, starting to manage expenses, right? You touched on this a little bit. What are some strategies? Because people get so caught up in the day-to-day, they're thinking about the next big expense, what they want to do. But, time goes by, time flies by. How can you start proactively implementing some financial strategies to start putting some money aside?
We already talked about one, budgeting or tracking expenses, seeing where your money's going, because money out and money not in your bank account anymore is lost opportunity for potential savings. So I think that's a high priority. The next should be paying attention to your debt. A lot of mortgage debt, I think, is like the least bad debt you can have. Auto loans are generally necessary, but once you start looking at like personal loans or people that have rolling credit card balances each month, those with interest rates where they are today are pushing above 20%. So be mindful of that. If you're in that type of situation, try to create a strategy to call yourself out of it. And one way to avoid getting into that is an emergency fund. Oftentimes I'll have people come into my office, younger families or new people that are wanting to start investing, and like, hey, this is what I got right now, and and I want to put $20,000 into the stock market. I'm like, well, let's not put the cart before the horse. Like, what's your balance sheet look like? And they're like, oh, I got, $7,000 in this credit card, $4,000 on this one. I'm like, well, look, there we can save you, money saved is money earned. We can earn you 25% by paying off that credit card right there. So get yourself an emergency fund. I recommend 6 to 9 months worth of expenses, maybe even on a higher side than that if you have children, because that is a very important piece, the foundation of a financial plan, especially with children. Job loss comes, unexpected bills come, car repairs, and then all of a sudden you find yourself back into a corner where you have to resort to those debt tools, those credit cards. And, credit cards are akin to money cancer in many cases.
So being strategic, maybe investing in the stock market or an IRA, maybe that's not the immediate solution. Maybe there's a way to even maximize more returns than what an IRA may yield at first.
It's case by case. I'm a huge advocate of saving for retirement, but, I think a lot of times I see people want to jump right into that before looking at, where they can put their money to best use, and that's often debt reduction. And so I'm all for, saving for retirement. I admire it, but a lot of times paying down debt, may be higher priority for certain people.
Do you think it's something that people should consider as financial planning strategies for children? Is that something that is becoming more popular? Because you look at now, like the cost of college, for example, what, 100,000, 50,000? I don't know, just for tuition. So, college could cost parents for one child $100,000 to $200,000 with living expenses and everything. That's a lot of money. What advice would you give to parents as far as trying to set their kids up for success? Maybe when they're smaller, so when they're 18, 20, 30 years old, they've got a really good platform to be able to go into life and start, living life as an adult.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I was actually reading an article. I read Barron's every weekend. It's a financial publication for investments, like an investment magazine that I get delivered to the house. And so try to keep up with that regularly. And there was an article in there a couple of weeks ago that talked about how our generation, like the younger generation, like the millennials or the 40 and under right now, they're much more generous with their wealth and trying to set up their kids than like generations that preceded us. And a lot of that has to do with what some of those generations went through with the housing crisis, or maybe even going all the way back to the Great Depression. But we're more generous. And some of the strategies that I see and I encourage some of my clients to leverage are 529s that you mentioned. College savings are very important. You could do traditional 529, or Florida has a great prepaid 529 option. And I see a lot of my clients wanting to start funding their kids' IRAs, or generally Roth IRAs. They have to have income for that, but a lot of my clients are business owners, or I know there's ways. I'm not a CPA. You want to consult with one about this, but there's ways that you can pay, give yourself money, give your children money for chores, for instance, and that's income that they could then use to fund a Roth IRA. But if you start funding your children's Roth IRAs at 10 years old, I've seen it with some of my friends. Their parents did it with them, and it set them up in a huge way for retirement planning. And so I do think that's, if that's important to you, those are strategies that you should explore.
It's unbelievable when you look at just over time, like what compound interest will do. It's really, really incredible to look at that big picture. And so touching on that point, thinking about compound interest is, how do you financially plan to set yourself up for prosperity long term? What's the key to success for that?
I think starting early is the biggest key, and you touched on that. Put yourself in the position to take advantage of that long-term compounding interest. There's a study, I don't know the exact numbers, but on Warren Buffett, where if he had just started like 10 years later than he did saving, he wouldn't even be a billionaire, I think is the number. It's something like that. But it's just most of his success in investing has been from compounding interest because he started so young. And so I think starting early, and like I said previously, even in small amounts, start early, start somewhere, but get started. And then I think living within your means, and this is something I think about often. We live in this society of Facebook and social media, and it's like keeping up with the Joneses is magnified now. It's the country clubs, and I've seen people do some really silly things just in order to try to keep up with the neighbor and the status quo. But don't overextend yourself. Live within your means. Keep a budget and just be consistent and be diligent. It's not rocket science, but oftentimes people let it become rocket science and try to complicate it and leverage themselves up, and that's when people generally get into trouble.
I think it's about being disciplined at the end of the day.
Big time.
I remember as a kid, one of the lessons I learned from my dad. He was, I would start making money from chores, or there would be a project and he would give me some money to help him out. And there was a principle that he always taught me, and it was a strategy of 3. And so let's say I would get $100. What he would do is he got me like this little toy bank account, and he made me put $33 in long-term savings, $33 in short-term savings, and then $33 just for spend money.
Yeah. So
long-term savings, that's something that's like long-term, like just putting money away for like
40, 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. Short-term, maybe it's, as a kid, I wanted to save up to buy like an electric scooter or something like that. Something a little bit bigger price ticket item, but not something necessarily I could just buy with my cash available. And then $33, that last $33 in just everyday expenses, that was just for, if I wanted to go out to a movie or, go grab some candy at the store, whatever it was. He instilled that in me. And I think that one thing I hear from teachers and one thing I look at the school system now is there's not that much financial planning or financial education that kids have. And you see some of these athletes, and they graduate high school, they start going and play college sports, and they're making millions of dollars now playing college sports, but they have absolutely no understanding financially on how to manage it or what to do with that money. Yeah. And that's why so many people once they come into money, they lose it. And so what advice would you give to parents to try to help educate their kids on financial planning and money, and how do you help prepare them with the knowledge so when they are an adult, they're capable of making those decisions by themselves?
That's a great point. And this has always been a point of contention with me and our school system, and I just don't know why that is, why it's not discussed, why it's not in the curriculum of most schools more so. I think it's getting there, like you're seeing it become a little bit more prevalent, but generally it's not, and I always say, trying to be funny, like you learn about I remember learning about the botany of a plant, but like I didn't know how to balance a checkbook or like pay taxes. Like I didn't graduate with any of those concepts. Those were self-learned in many cases. You got to make sure a lot of times you're taking care of these things in the home front, because unfortunately you can't really lean on the education system for those lessons. Example with your dad, I think, is a great one. That's a budgeting experience that he gave to you at an early age. And so that's very impactful. Budgeting, borrowing, pay them for chores around the house. And so those types of experiences and interactions with money at an early age will go a long way, over the lifetime of children. And then finally, like anything, my wife and I were talking just last night, we try to catch up regularly about like parenting and making sure we're on the same page, and are we being good examples for our children? And I think that's that's the biggest one, is just being the example that you want to be for your kids, and modeling the behavior that you want to implement. Because if I'm reckless with my money and I'm burning, I'm just spending on material things, what do you think my kids are going to grow up like? It's probably going to be similar. So be a good role model and help instill those things at a young age.
It's crazy how much of a sponge they are, just like by observing it. You're not even necessarily saying anything to them, but them just seeing you do something. It's crazy, like what they, induce from that. It's really cool.
It is. Yeah. It's a fun ride.
But John, thanks so much for coming on. If people have any questions, if they want to reach out to you and ask you anything about what we talked about today, how can they find you?
Stop by our office on Beachland Boulevard, the Cantor Group of Raymond James, 625 Beachland, or our office phone number is 772-205-2141. thecantorgroup.com. We're on Facebook, social media. We'd love to give anybody a second opinion, or if any of these topics hit home with you, come into our office. We'll chat about them and see, if we can point you in the right direction.
Awesome. I'm Jordan Lulich. This is the Lulich Corner, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.